Ladies and gentlemen, hello again. Welcome to another Reflected Reality Simulations video. My name is Graham, this is X-Plane 11 and the Britten-Norman Islander by TorqueSim. This is part 3 of the video series, leaving Southampton Airport and the instrument approach behind, routing across the southwest down towards Beaulieu disused airfield, we'll route then along the Solent back to Lee-on-Solent airfield for the visual approach and landing in there. Very short flight from now on, only about 15 minutes to go. On the way we'll have a look at the low speed handling on the aircraft and getting familiar with the landing pitch attitude. So I'll bring the power back to around about 15 inches on the manifold and I'll make the carb heat hot. These are the carb heat levers here. I'll use the keystroke for that. And with a carburetor engine, because of the airflow through the carburetor reducing in temperature, even when the outside air temperature is 15-20 degrees, with enough humidity in the environment you can develop ice in the carburetor and it blocks the airflow. So carb heat, when you select carb heat hot, it changes the air source, if you like, for the inlet from ambient air to air that's drawn over the exhaust manifold just to warm up the air. Any ice that's built up in the carburetor will be melted and ingested through the engine. So if you select the carb heat hot and you have rough running on the engine, then that's a sign there's been ice in the carburetor. Leave the carb heat hot until it runs smoothly and then return the carb heat to the cold position. I tend to use the carb heat whenever I'm at low power settings, much below 17-15 inches. There's a carb temperature gauge. That doesn't really work at the moment, although that will be corrected in the next version. So here we are at 95 knots and the pitch attitude is around about 5 or 6 degrees. If we have a look on the outside, and if I move the view around so the horizon is just where the wheels are, we can see that 6 degrees would give us reasonable nose wheel clearance and reasonable tail clearance. If we land in this attitude, it'll be fine, but we probably don't want to land any flatter than that. We want the nose gear to have a reasonable space, especially considering landing gear compression. Here's Beaulieu Airfield, as I said, a disused World War II airfield. If I slow down a little bit more, so this is our landing attitude here, see how far the horizon is away from the instrument panel, and this will change depending on where your view is, so it's worth doing the check yourself. I'll just reduce the power a little bit more until I get the nose up to about 10 degrees. So for me, 10 degrees is roughly when the instrument panel is sitting on the horizon. If we have a look outside at 10 degrees, you see that the nose gear is a lot further off the horizon line and the tail is a lot closer. There's still a little bit of margin, I could still pitch a bit more, but for planning the landing for the aiming point, I don't really want the nose to be much higher than that. It'd start to get a bit marginal if we went beyond that. So I'll increase the power back to about 23 inches and I'll set the carb heat to hot. On short final, you'll hear me say 3 levers up and 4 levers forward. One of the traps on the Islander is the parking brake and the carb heat is right next to each other. This is the parking brake, this is the carb heat. You really want to use the carb heat on the descent, and forgetting to turn the carb heat cold before landing isn't the end of the world, but landing with the parking brake on certainly is. So always check 3 levers up and 4 levers forward. Let's turn around to the left and we'll head down towards the Solent and then back towards Lee-on-Solent airfield. Here's the Isle of Wight, where the Islander was built. We've got Hurst Point ahead of us and this is the Needles. This was a rocket engine testing site in the 1950s and 60s. This is Lymington, I think. This is Beaulieu River and the Solent Southampton water. Let me bring up the tablet device here and this is the noise abatement pattern for Lee-on-Solent. This is one of the frustrations about flying to general aviation airfields in the UK. Every airfield seems to have its own separate noise abatement pattern. Now, common sense dictates not flying repeatedly over built up areas, but every airfield has something unique. And what is even more frustrating is there isn't really a centralised location to find that information out, because Lee-on-Solent is licensed, but it doesn't publish this information in the AIP, the Aeronautical Information Publication. You have to go to their website and find it yourself. Now, part of that is it's really more important for locally based pilots who are going to fly circuits over and over again. If you're just visiting, it's probably okay if you don't get it quite right. But it's just one of these things that makes general aviation flying in the UK a lot more frustrating than perhaps it needs to be. Routing along the coast here, I'm going to remain over the Solent, and that keeps me out of Southampton control zone. We can see the control zone on the GPS here. I can use the GPS actually to help me make the approach as well. Although it's a visual approach, it's always good to have some assistance, especially in the simulator. So I'm going to use the outside knob here and go to the nearest airport screen. I'll go to EGHF, which is Lee-on-Solent, do direct and enter. That's taking me direct to Lee-on-Solent. I'll put my CDI into GPS mode, so I've got the GPS information here. I'll also click the OBS mode here. With it in OBS, I can change the course deviation bar here and watch the magenta line on the GPS as I turn it. It turns alongside. So if I put the bar onto 225 degrees, which is the same as the runway at Lee-on-Solent, it gives me a centre line and also the cross-track information, which is fairly useful to have. So I tend to fly the aircraft on autopilot during the videos simply because I'm right-handed. I've got a right-handed joystick and I use my right hand with a mouse as well. So the autopilot lets me point with the mouse a little bit more, but it's a very satisfying aircraft to hand fly as well. We're just about 7 or 8 miles from the airfield just now, so I'll put the fuel pumps on. I'll make sure that all of my switches are set, including the passenger notices. And then we'll take the autopilot out. So just passing Bewley River. Up here, this is Calshot Spit. It was a seaplane base in the early part of the 20th century. I'll make a slight power reduction and we'll descend down to 1,000 feet. By staying to the south of Calshot Spit, it keeps me outside the Southampton control zone now. So as I said in one of the previous videos, an oddity in, a feature in the UK airspace is that even Class D and Class C airspace, you need specific entry clearance into those airspaces. It's not good enough just to be talking to the controller, you have to get specific permission to enter Class A and Class D. And that's common in most of the world. The US and I believe Canada uses a slightly modified system, but it's normal to require clearance into controlled airspace. If you leave controlled airspace, there isn't an automatic right to rejoin. So having flown out of the Class D airspace, I would need permission to re-enter again. So there's 1,000 feet. I'll just adjust the trim and we'll slow down to the circuit speed. The Islander can fly very fast around the circuit and it can fly very slow around the circuit. I tend to aim for 100 knots at the start of the downwind leg. So we're going to remain to the north of this nature reserve here, out towards an industrial area here, turning right, staying over the unpopulated area, down towards this solar facility here, turning right and landing on runway 23. Bring the power back to about 17 inches and I'll make the carb heat hot. So again, you can see the benefit of having the cross-track information on the GPS and also the runway orientation on the HSI. So to follow this noise abatement pattern, it's going to put us very wide in the circuit, about 1.5 miles, or just over 1.5 miles downwind. On the downwind, I'm going to make sure that the mixture is full forward, and we'll leave the propellers until we are a little bit slower. There's the airfield on the right hand side. If I just adjust the view, we can see the industrial area just shortly passing below the nose of the aircraft. And approaching the end of the downwind leg, about 100 knots, I take flaps to take off and adjust the pitch to hold altitude, looking to slow down to around about 75 or 80. And we'll start a gentle turn onto the base leg. So as I reduce the power setting, you can see the RPM change as well. That's an indication the propellers are already on the fine stops, so I can bring the propeller lever full forward without any change to the actual RPM. 80 knots, we can see the solar facility just ahead of us, hiding beneath those trees. Take flaps to landing, adjust the pitch, maybe a little bit more power, and I'll make sure the carb heat's cold now. So there's 3 levers up and 4 levers forward. 65 to 70 miles an hour. So I'm going to aim for a reasonably short field landing at Lee-on-Solent. If all goes well, we'll make the first exit. Don't want to get too low, I'm a little bit on the low side just now, so a bit of power. We'll start the turn. And this is good practice for flying the Islander in more challenging destinations. We're doing this tight turn on to final here because of noise abatement. If we get it wrong, there's no big deal. If there was terrain in the way, that's a whole different thing. So I want to make sure that I'm looking at the far end of the runway, not staring at the numbers. That's a surefire way to fly straight into them. Adjusting the power, setting the pitch attitude, power coming off, and down. Nose gears down, apply the brakes. And we'll vacate to the right. Once we've vacated, I'll bring the flaps up, double check the flaps travel to up, turn the fuel pumps off, make sure the pitot and stall warning heaters are off and the landing lights are off. And that's us set for the taxi in. I'll taxi the aircraft to the parking stand while you have a look at the landing on the replay. Okay, so we'll try and park the aircraft back where we picked it up an hour or so ago. I've only got push button brakes. I believe there's a plug-in available to smooth that out. I need to have a look for that. So come to a halt, set the parking brake, and I'll reset 1200 RPM. What I'll do is we'll switch the transponder to standby, put the avionics off, vent motor comes off, and then we'll do a quick check on the mags. So again, looking at the left engine and the right engine RPM, as I switch the mags off individually, we're expecting a slight drop, but the engine still runs. So drop, no stop. We do that for all 4 mags, then we bring the engine back to idle. The engines, I should say, back to idle. Mixture to cut off. Fuel pumps are off, fuel selectors off, mags off. So we've got throttle, mixture, fuel, mags. Down here, switches can go off, and electrics off. That's the Britten-Norman Islander. One little correction from the part 1 video series. I said with the door open to check the mags you have to put the battery switch on. In actual fact, you can check the alarm works without the battery switched on. I hope you enjoyed the 3 videos with the Islander. We've looked at a full flight, a visual approach and landing, and an instrument approach to the missed approach. Hopefully in the next few videos we'll have a look at some more interesting flights you can do with the Islander. I'd love to hear your suggestions in the comments for where you want me to fly it next. Thanks very much for listening, and I do hope you'll check out some of the other videos on the channel.